All right. Well, it is April 2018. I cannot believe it. Just where does the time go, right? So anyways, feel free to unmute yourself if you have any specific questions, but this is our monthly Q&A call related to amplitude integrated EEG. And today we're going to talk a little bit about aEEG and cooling. Pull this up. Hey, Tess. So I have my screen up above, so sorry it looks weird when I look up to my other screen for chat. So anybody have any specific questions, burning questions that you want to chat about this morning? Feel free to unmute yourself if you would like to ask a question. Otherwise, I'll just dive into our slides and see if that creates any conversation. Where's my water? So we just finished up the Developmental Care Book Club. That was kind of fun this morning. It's a new little thing we're starting. So if you're interested in that. All right, so no major burning questions. No? All right, then we'll just dive right in to amplitude integrated EEG. So just as a reminder, I always like to remind everyone there are really only 5 patterns of amplitude integrated EEG. We have one that's normal for term babies, one that's normal for preterm babies, and everything else is not normal. Doesn't matter how old you are. So I always just think it's important to keep things simple because I think aEEG can be overwhelming. And so if we remind our staff that really term baby, 1 normal, preterm baby, 1 normal, everything else not normal. So what are these normals and abnormals? Well, we definitely use the pattern descriptions from Hellstrom Westis, but we combine that now with the voltage patterns. And so probably all of you are very aware of this, right? So for normal, right, that term baby normal, we're looking for upper margins greater than 10, lower margins greater than 5. And the most important feature for term babies is the continuity, which is the lower margin. So really we're looking at that lower margin greater than 5. That's really where we start to see the continuous activity. When there is continuous activity, that lower margin can't creep down below that 5. So that's really what we're looking at. And for maturation as well, we're looking for that over time, that lower margin creeps to greater than 5. That's really the distinguishing feature. When we talk about discontinuous, that's really where we're looking at that lower margin, and it's spending the majority of its time lower than 5. If I spent some time last month in Germany with Katrin Klebermass and Monica Olischar, and they really are continuing to advocate for, especially our preterm babies, using that they have what's high and low discontinuous. So if it's between that 2 and like 0 to 3 kind of area, that's that low discontinuous. And then from that 3 to 5 being that high discontinuous. So you can almost rate the maturity over time as things start to kind of like move its way up to that. So up towards that 5. And we know that for a normal background for discontinuous, we need this variability. It's not that it's, so low and flat, because then that's when we start getting into that burst suppression pattern when it's so low and so flat in between. So we want that variability for discontinuous. And then we have, of course, our burst suppression, continuous low voltage, and inactive. Those are not normal for no matter how old we are. So healthy term babies, continuous. And then we have kind of this discontinuous only when they're in sleep. And then we have burst suppression, low, and isoelectric or flat are never normal. And what's really important is really to think about our infant's history. So gestational age, so important when we're assessing that aEEG. We need to know there's so much impact of maturation, brain maturation based on how old our babies are. We need to be, keeping an eye on the age. We need to know the history. So we need to know if they have had some sort of medications. We need to know if whether or not they have had some other issues going on that are putting them at risk for an injury. But certainly we want to know that history. We need to know if they're being cooled, because we know that's going to change the trajectory of their kind of brain patterns and, of course, their recovery, which I'm going to talk about here. And we need to know just generally what medications we've provided. Have we given sedation? Have we given paralytics? Have we given anti-epileptics? What are those things that we've given that may influence the amplitude integrated EEG? So there have been several studies that have been published. And if we look at these different things, we know that there are things like gestational age, which we've talked about, and level of HIE. So I'm only focusing on those two things for right now. And so we know that if there is little to no injury of aEEG, that babies tend to have continuous normal voltage patterns. This is where you're just like, whew, this baby is doing good. Mild injury, we tend to see discontinuous. The other thing that happens with HIE that's actually not on here is the sleep-wake cycles. Hypoxic brains do not organize well. Injured brains don't organize. And the biggest thing that our babies do is to organize sleep-wake patterns. And so mild injury, you see discontinuous, but almost more important, you see no sleep-wake patterns or super disrupted sleep-wake patterns. So I think that that's really important to kind of keep an eye on those sleep-wake patterns. Burst suppression, if it's transient, like less than a few hours, that's always a good sign of a mild injury. If it persists and the interburst interval is very wide, so that amount of time between the spikes, that's more severe, and especially if it persists. And then continuous low voltage, where that brain is literally run out of power, is always an indication of severe injury. So those are where we want to kind of keep in mind. We know what is normal for a term baby when it comes to aEEG patterns, but what we want to do is to talk about, based on the injury, what are we seeing and how does aEEG support us in kind of getting us there. Gestational age, just to remind you that there are some patterns that are very expected in very low gestational ages. So I want to make sure that we don't get worried if we do see kind of a burst suppression-y like pattern in a very, very young baby. It's very normal. Their brains just haven't generated enough organization to sustain that. So again, we know what's expected when they're older. I'm not sure why this says 26 to 30, 305 weeks, but that should be 30 weeks. Sorry about that. So anyways, just to kind of remind you that there are these gradients of normal as well. All right, so probably all of you have seen this paper. If not, this is a great paper by Mariana Thorenson, Linda DeVries, Lena Hellstrom-Westis. And they wanted to look at that old voltage classification, and they wanted to look at pattern classification, and they wanted to look at cooling babies, because a lot of the original research were done in an era where we didn't yet cool babies. So this is a place where they looked at what they wanted to consider normal during cooling. So this is only for cooling babies, versus what was kind of the voltage classification over on the left was really for normothermic babies or non-cooled babies. And so before we used to say, only having that continuous normal voltage pattern, upper margin greater than 10, lower margin greater than 5, that was normal. But once we started cooling babies, we realized that they could have a normal-ish outcome if they even showed discontinuous patterns. And this is during the period of cooling. So definitely we want them to resume continuous normal voltage patterns, by rewarming if possible. So let's look at some of her other literature. These are just saying voltage and pattern. All right, so before cooling, these were, this is actually how we decided to use aEEG as a tool to enroll babies in the original studies. So remember, it's almost hard to even remember that there was a time when we did not cool babies with HIE. We didn't even know if cooling would be safe. And so Mona Todt, Linda DeVries, those groups, they were looking at aEEG as a predictor of outcome. And they were monitoring babies very early. They were monitoring these babies at 3 hours of life and 6 hours of life. And they were looking to see if they could predict outcomes. And what they realized is that babies who had a good outcome they ended up starting in that kind of normal pattern, continuous or discontinuous. They stayed there, or they recovered quickly. So if you'll see here on the left, hopefully you can see my pointer. So we had 8 babies at 3 hours of life who then progressed back to continuous normal voltage. Remember I talked about quickly moving. They also at 6 hours still had 5 babies who stayed in burst suppression. This is still 6 hours of life. So this is not looking at 12 and 24 and that. I have a study that shows that. But let's look at the babies with poor outcomes. Some of them did have a normal looking aEEG. So again, it's not 100%, right? The predictive value is somewhere in the high 80s to 90s. So we still have some babies who had a normal, but who had a bad outcome. But then look at this one. Of the 4 continuous, look what happened to this baby who had at 3 hours of life, had continuous normal voltage, and at 6 hours was at a flat tracing, bad outcome. Discontinuous got worse. Burst suppression stayed the same. Burst suppression got worse. Burst suppression got worse. Continuous low voltage did go to burst suppression, so a little bit of an upward pattern, but otherwise staying the same. So showing that these early patterns were predictive. These are still relevant if you end up having kids that you don't cool, that for some reason don't make it to the hospital, or who are, catastrophic in other ways, and you don't cool them. These are still reliable numbers, but the majority of our babies are getting cooled. This is a super busy slide, but I want to just quickly orient you to it, because this is how we first started to understand looking at aEEG and uncooled babies. So it's divided up into outcomes on the left, excuse me, abnormal outcomes here, mild outcomes, so one thing going on with the baby, or normal. And then here's all the patterns. This would be purple is continuous normal voltage with sleep. Blue is continuous normal voltage. Green is discontinuous. This one is discontinuous or continuous, but they had epileptic activity. So EA is epileptic activity. The yellows are burst suppression. The checkered yellow is burst suppression with epileptic activity seizures, or status epilepticus is SE. And then we have continuous low voltage with epilepsy, and then a flat tracing. So basically the blues and greens are kind of the more normal patterns. The yellows are more of the yucky patterns, the ominous patterns. So let's look at the normal babies. Normal babies here at the bottom. They started out, even if they started out in burst suppression, this is the actual patient number, and then this is the time, 0 to 72 hours. So even if they started out in burst suppression, look how quickly they flipped over to the blues and the greens. Something good. And so you see it here. Even this one, a flat trace at 6 hours, quickly moving to low voltage and then switching over to discontinuous. And then the blues here are the normal patterns. And then the S's, you can see these tiny little S's mean sleep, 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 sleep. So if they had a great sleep cycle. So what this study showed, that babies who had normal aEEG had normal outcomes. Then look here at the mild ones. You had some who started out pretty good. And then they had some here with this yellow and oranges, but most of them all flipped, and only one of them had seizures. See this little bit here. But then look at the babies who had poor outcomes. Oranges and reds, seizures, orange and reds, yellows, orange and red. So burst suppression, continuous, low voltage, flat tracing, seizures, 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 seizures. You see nothing but checkerboards all over here. The babies, and this was again uncooled babies. So what this study showed was that if by 24 hours babies would convert to a discontinuous or a normal voltage patterns, they were more likely to have a good outcome. So this is where that, for a long time, we just were looking at kiddos that way. So then what Mariana and Linda and Lena decided to do is look at the cooling era babies. So they took the Toby trial kiddos, some who are being cooled, some who are not being cooled, and they looked at, well, how predictive is aEEG? How predictive? Can we use it still? Well, look at the cooling babies. These are the blue lines. This is the positive predictive value. So look at this. In the first 24, not super predictive, not like the old days, 80, 90%. But if we start getting out here to 48 hours, 36, we get closer. So 24 to 36, we get close. We get back to 90. unlike, you know, in the old days when we would be 24, 36, very predictive of outcomes. But then not until we hit 48 do we match up. And at 48 and 72 hours, the predictive value of aEEG background pattern is very predictive. So here, sorry, just to show you that. Okay, the other thing is, this is just another way to look at it. In that paper, I love this paper, it's so helpful to us. Red babies are normothermic babies. These are these indicate babies. The red ones are the normothermics. The blues are your hypothermics. And then we have good outcome, bad outcome, good outcome, bad outcome. Again, look at the bad outcomes. So we have these babies who are reaching normal trace past 24, all the way up here, and never. And the stars are babies who actually died. So the ones who are passing away are even never regaining normal trace before they died. But look at the good outcomes. Again, I'll see this huge cluster, early recovery of background pattern all the way up to 24. So this study, same. It stayed the same for, reiterated that the 24 hours is really important. Then look at the good outcomes. So we did have a major amount of babies who still convert by that 24 hours, but look how far out the good babies' good outcomes were, all the way up here to 48. And then again, you still have some of these babies who have poor outcomes who do convert by 24, who do convert by 48. But again, you see still kind of continuation, and the bulk of them, you know, up here never regaining normal tracings. So what the message is now is that we need to watch it, and we need to watch it continuously, but that we really give babies, instead of that 24-hour cutoff, if they're being cooled, we give them all the way to 48 hours for that return of normal tracing. This is the group from DC Children's and Massaro, and they were looking at babies who had poor outcomes, death or adverse outcomes. Did they have any recovery of their background? Those who had the worst outcomes didn't have that. If they had no bad outcomes, you can see that they had full recovery or partial recovery, up to 50% of those. So it's another great study, very similar kind of numbers as well, looking at 48 hours. The other really strong predictor is sleep-wake cycling. So remember, sleep-wake cycling is that alternation between continuous and discontinuous, continuous and discontinuous, continuous and discontinuous. And we're looking for organized patterns, about one sleep cycle every hour is what we look for. And we're looking for about 20 to 30 minutes into that discontinuous deep sleep state, and then 20 to 30 minutes out. And similar kind of graph here where we're looking at babies who we'll just look at the hypothermic babies, right? Since that's the majority of our kiddos. We can see, again, early return to sleep-wake cycling by 24, even more by 48, and even out here at 72 hours. So the bulk of them are here, before that 72. And again, babies with poor outcomes, even here when we're at the rewarming stage, and not regaining until far out as well. So we're just, again, looking at that sleep-wake cycling. And Massaro's group, again, from DC Children's, found same thing, that day of life 4, those babies who had the best outcomes had recovered their sleep-wake patterns by that 4th day. So by that rewarming day, by the time you've completed that. So are you guys trending this in your nurseries? Are you trending the return? Are you documenting that when it comes up on aEEG? What are you all doing related to that? Tell me. So I know that some of you are here in chat. If you want to unmute yourself, happy to hear from you. What are you guys doing? Anyone? You can text it in as well. It's fine if you're not in a quiet place. So are you guys looking for this return of normal trace? Are you looking? Yeah. So Tess, yeah, we are. How about the sleep-wake cycling? I think it's one of those ones that, maybe we don't talk about as much. So Tess is saying yes. Awesome. And this is the same there. So for cooled babies, remembering those first 48 hours, we're really looking for those continuous and discontinuous patterns to reemerge. Great, yeah. So Polly, you're learning from the best, of course. But yeah, it's really important to be looking at that, and then to still remember that we can have babies who have very pathological patterns who are being cooled, but that it's all about the speed at which those convert to the more acceptable patterns for normal. So we're looking at those very flat traces, those very low voltage patterns, but that we almost expect them. We know it's part of the disease, but it's really all about that speed, speed to conversion, and really marking, when do we think that baseline is starting to show some variability? Are you starting to see those sinusoidal patterns? What's that lower margin? Remembering that lower margin is really that piece of the continuity. How continuous is the brain? That lower margin is so important. It's important for our cooling babies. It's important for our premature babies. That lower margin really is that marker of brain activity. It's that how continuous is the brain. Remember, every 15 seconds, it does that maximum, minimum. That minimum comes from that integration, the degrading of the signal. The longer there is suppressed activity, the lower the pattern gets. And so we want to really, really look at that lower margin. It's so important. And I think that, we do look at just kind of eyeball the patterns, but looking at that lower margin is so important. I don't know how many more times I can say that today. All right, so during cooling, again, we want to be looking for those discontinuous and continuous patterns, really charting out, and maybe even just using those highs and lows that, Katrin and Monica have put in the literature for us. I mean, in these cooling babies, maybe it would be useful to be thinking about that discontinuous pattern as high or low, especially as it's shifting away from burst suppression. And I guess that was the last slide. So just reminding you to just kind of dig in and review that. And some people are saying they're not charting it, and some are. So it could be just an opportunity to, improve those assessments around our little ones who are being cooled especially. So any other questions that have popped up in your mind, or anything else that now I've reminded you of that you'd like to chat about? Thanks for jumping on. I love seeing so many of you in the morning.
Hey, Kathy, it's Melissa. How are you?
Let me know if you need help unmuting, or feel free to chat in if you want to.
Testing. Can you hear me?
Everybody is on my little screen here. You guys are good? Are you all familiar with these particular references? Was this do you need me to post those up for you, the references somewhere? No? Good? Oh, Anne, what pattern would you see with Versed? I'll ask the group. What do you guys see with Versed? Or what would you expect to see with Versed?
Low voltage, that's what I would guess.
Any guesses? Yeah, lower voltage. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's actually quite suppressing, Versed. The kids I've seen monitored with it, you're pretty much seeing that low, you're actually seeing more of a low voltage pattern. You almost suppress out the upper limits. Melissa's on here, and if you want to comment to any experience you have with that too. But I've seen lower voltage. I've seen almost flat tracings. And I see it even more pronounced on an injured brain. So if the baby has had an injury or is premature, I tend to see an even more dramatic effect.
Can you hear me, Kathy?
I don't know if Melissa, you want to add anything to that? I'm having a hard time with my computer today. It is misbehaving because I'm not sure if you guys are talking and I'm missing it. I'm going to switch my headphones over and see if that helps. You're trying to unmute. Okay, let me see if I can unmute you, Melissa. I think it's also my phone today. It's just my computer today is like misbehaving considerably. Where are you in my list? Okay, it says you're unmuted.
Can you hear me?
I think
Testing?
it's my computer, honestly.
Okay.
Let me just join from my phone really quick, and then I know it works. Now I can hear.
Hi,
I'm
Kathy.
so sorry if people have been talking to me this whole time.
Can you hear me? It's Melissa.
Yes, yeah.
Okay. I don't remember what your question was. Something about Versed?
Yeah, someone was asking what would you expect to see?
It's been a while since I've been in that realm. I'm an EEG tech for 30 plus years, but getting back into this with the aEEG trending now, I would expect suppression, or I don't know if what you guys give now to put your babies into a medically induced coma, and if you do that during this time. So I don't know if you do that, put them into burst suppression at the first 72 on purpose.
Yeah, not typically. Yeah, not typically, but I've seen it for status epilepticus, Versed drips.
Okay, and
for sure.
That was my next question. So when you're looking at these babies and they start seizing, how many of them are in non-convulsive seizures or non-convulsive status?
Yeah, so the literature is showing about 80%.
That's what I heard, and I just thought, wow, that's really significant. So once you get the aEEG on, you're able to notice that the baby is having seizures that you're not able to physically detect. That's great.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, especially HIE babies.
Okay. And yeah. How often do the seizures usually start in the HIE babies?
Yeah, so it's pretty common still. I think that cooling is a little bit anti-convulsive in the sense of it tends to control seizures a little bit as well, just kind of that calming down the brain fire so much. But then this is why there's that percentage, about 10%, who will definitely seize during rewarming. So this is why we really advocate for continuous monitoring, and if you stop continuous monitoring, to resume continuous monitoring, around the time of rewarming, because there is it's a small risk, but there are many babies who will, in fact, seize during rewarming. So I'm blanking on the number. Yeah. Like of total infants, I want to say it's in the 20 to 30% range who do seize, who have HIE and who are being cooled. Polly might be able to answer, or somebody else.
My other question was, and then I will give the floor to
Someone.
When you first get the baby and you put aEEG on, do you ever see seizures right away?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's why the sooner you monitor, the better off the baby can do in the long run. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks, Kathy. Appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. So totally apologize if all of you have been talking to me for 10 minutes. Oh my gosh, sometimes these technology. Any other questions? And you ask about anti-seizure meds. So for anti-seizure, for phenobarb, typically, again, it's when you have a sick brain, all of these meds make havoc in the brain. So when you give an anti-epileptic, it does usually drop the voltage. So let's say you have kind of a kiddo who's seizing, and you give just that loading dose. Typically, if the brain is otherwise healthy, right, which seems kind of like not really possible, but a healthier brain who is seizing, what you'll see is kind of, if the baby was kind of in a normal pattern, you will see them go into a discontinuous pattern for about an hour after that first loading dose. If the brain is on the edge of being more unwell, you will see the baby go into an even wider pattern, aEEG pattern, a suppressed pattern, and almost a burst suppression pattern, where you really start to see the baby's bottom edge flatten out, and just the overall voltage kind of trends down. If the brain is well, you will just see that transient suppression for about that 30, 45 minutes, and then you will see kind of a return to baseline. So giving those meds, yes, you're treating something, but it also does give you a little sneaky peek at like how healthy the neurons are. For morphine and fentanyl, I don't see nearly as much impact. as the benzos. So when you're looking at fentanyl and morphine, you're usually seeing 1 or 2 microvolts difference at the baseline. That's really all that's been documented in the literature. It's really all I've ever seen is maybe 1 or 2 microvolts on the lower margin suppression, because you're definitely calming the brain down. So you would expect it to go into more of a variable pattern. So sorry about the sound issues. I mean, I think you could hear me, but I could not hear you guys, sorry. That helpful? Any other questions? Someone else is unmuted, but I'm not sure if you have a question or not. Mary, sounds like looks like you might be unmuted now. Tess, you're unmuted.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Hopefully my dogs don't speak.
Uh-oh.
No, I just wrote something in.
That's Mary, right?
Right. I'm still trying to learn how to do the Zoom, so apologies.
No, you did great. No, you did great. Any other questions? Tess, you're okay? You're good? Or you have a question? And Anne, looks like you're also unmuted. All of you are probably trying to talk to me and saying things to me for the whole time, so sorry.
Kathy, it's
You're
Melissa.
good. Hi, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Is there a limit to how long you can cool the baby? Is it always just 72 or?
Yeah, so currently it's only 72 is what we know. So we want to start, we still want to start before 6. We still want to start before 6 hours, and we only cool for 72 hours.
No matter what?
Yep, no matter what.
Okay.
Yeah, there was a study that we did that looked at doing longer, and it didn't show favorable outcome.
Okay.
Yeah, so we did, it's called the Optimizing Cooling Trial. So Optimizing Cooling Trial went longer at the same 33.5. It also went deeper for the same, and then we also went deeper and longer. It was like a 4 intervention arm study, and that showed that it actually had higher mortality. So we don't do longer and we don't do deeper. We did finish the study of late cooling, so starting between that 6 and 24, and it does show some benefit to some babies,
Okay.
just not as strong.
Okay.
And some hospitals have decided to start cooling later babies, as well as as well as their babies that are still less than 6. So still trying to get them to core temperature as early as possible. Mm-hmm. You know, the animal data shows us that up to 2 hours is really the optimal time. But we know it provides benefit up to 6, and then now some benefit up to 24.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. And then we're still enrolling at Stanford and the other neonatal research centers. We're still enrolling for the premature cooling. So that's the babies between 34 and 1 and 35 and 6/7. So we're still enrolling for those because we believe that there is not defined enough benefit and not enough population were included in the original studies to prove that it really is of benefit to smaller babies. So we are still enrolling for that. But some people are also cooling those babies.
Kathy,
any other? Yeah.
I have a question. If you have an inactive flat isoelectric aEEG on a baby, mm-hmm. unfortunately,
yes.
One of the challenges we had with a patient was the discussion of pain management. Mm. What can you say about that? I mean, we went with the assuming there may be sensation, but we didn't see changes in vital signs related to that, and certainly we didn't see anything with our aEEG or the EEG that was read by neurology.
So you didn't see any activity, you mean?
No.
Yeah, so I mean, so remember that aEEG is just a compressed trend of EEG over just certain select areas. So
for true diagnostic purposes, for calling end of life situations, we still rely on our full EEG. And I would just defer to like the neurology definitions around that. Certainly medications do make an impact on that. Depending on the age and the other things going on, I mean, I don't often see a flat. I've seen it only a few times. And one time was after a dose of Ativan. And it started recovering within about 12 hours, some recovery. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a trend, and it's a limited channel. So it's not giving you, there can be activity, you know, in the brainstem, there can be activity in the frontal. I mean, we're not monitoring those areas. So I always say, you know, this is what I can say based on what I'm monitoring, but certainly there can be other activity in other places. And of course, it complements your exam. It complements everything else you're doing. So I'm not sure if that's answering or if that's helpful, but
well,
I mean,
it is helpful. Yeah.
Medication can do it, but I mean, you have to kind of correlate it, you know, to the story and to the exam and the other findings and imaging, and, you know, it's just one piece of the puzzle, aEEG.
Right.
So someone was asking, the lowest gestational age you've cooled, 34 in the cooling in our study. Otherwise we stick to 36. So I'm not sure if that answers that question fully, but. And they're hard. Those 34 weekers are hard to control. They're hard to cool, yeah. And so we're doing that in the randomized control trial. Because we know that the literature around, you know, hypothermia and prematurity, you know, I mean, it increases mortality. So, you know, you want to be careful. You know, temperature, I mean, you know, normothermia is therapeutic too, you know, so we want to make sure that, you know, sometimes the best thing we can do for babies is just keep them from being hyperthermic. Oh, thanks, Polly. Yeah, so it's 33. Sorry, 33. Thanks, Polly. She's a research nurse. So she does all the enrollments for her kiddos in Texas. So thank you for that. Any other questions? And I'd have to look back at our inclusion. I don't know that we've gotten as low as 33. I think 34 has been our smallest in our enrollments, but I'd have to look to be sure. They certainly get complicated. Anything else? Again, apologies for the audio issues if you were trying to talk to me earlier. I was like, you guys are being so quiet today. Anyways, great discussion. Thanks all. And I will see you next month. It'll be on Tuesday, May 29th is our next call. And you'll be getting reminders since it's a little bit off of our normal schedule like today. Just it's my travel over these next couple months has just been kind of crazy. And then we have a holiday on our normally scheduled day. So we just moved it to Tuesday. So we'd stay in the same week. So I'll see you guys after the American Memorial Day holiday for those of you who are outside the US. As always, just send an email if I can answer any questions. And thanks for all your great questions. Appreciate you all. So have a great weekend.
Kathy, see you later.
Yeah, thank you. See ya. Bye.